In the following video, I'm going to be showing you how to make your very own DIY desk. Full disclaimer, I am not an expert craftsman or a carpenter. I'm a goofy guy in a garage making mistakes so you don't have to. It's one of the main premises of this channel. Now, the desk made a great addition to a living room and had a nice computer on it. Highly recommend something like this for maybe a casual setup, maybe not like a writing desk or anything along those lines. We did put a glass tabletop on it, as you can see, which was around, I think, $30. So if you are making a desk out of very soft woods like cedar, Purple Heart cedar, highly recommend that. It was a great option and a great addition. Now, this segment of the video is primarily dedicated to just tell you about the adversities that were faced while doing the project. You're going to see a lot of unsafe practices while this is being made, and the primary reason: I don't have the right tools or equipment, I don't have the right place to be doing this. I'm doing it on my hands and knees, and if I had a table saw and if I had a, one of the machine planers just run the boards through, I could probably do this a lot easier. But I was using, a hand plane, sander, chop saw, and a skill saw, some clamps, things like that, right? And that's about all I was using. So in terms of difficulty for the project, pretty much anybody can do it. You might need a few tools here and there, but definitely you do not need a whole shop. These boards are Purple Heart cedar, and they were gotten, I believe, from Oklahoma. Now, it was one of those on-site mills. The boards were not perfect at all. They were, a little bent, some 80-degree angles here and there, right, instead of 90. So I made the best effort initially to get them all square and as perfect as possible before starting the project, because I knew it was just going to cause issues. And you could see how dry this wood is. It had been sitting in a garage for years and years, probably half a decade. Very dry, and you know what happens when when it's dry wood. There's splintering and everything when you're cutting it, and chunks flying off. So something to consider, right? Not the ideal circumstance, but I was doing my best part to counteract it. So this is what I'm doing here. I'm chopping up the boards to size you saw in the previous segment, trying to get a tabletop worked out. And the tabletop was 18 inches deep by 48 inches wide. That's what I started off with, at least. With a thickness of, I guess it doesn't matter in the long run, maybe initially it was like 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches, right? And I ended up having to shave it down so far because the boards were not straight at all, right? So I had to take off a lot of thickness on either side to get them kind of straight, right? Or kind of flat, I'm sorry. Yeah, so in the next segment of this video, what you're going to see is me trying to get these straight on the sides rather than, curved or what have you. And, no workbenches here, right? I was, making some makeshift situation going, and I'm going to get this saw and just run it along the side of it. And I was using, so as a reference, as a guide for the saw, I was using another board that I was also using in the project. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out there that if the first one that I'm using as a guide isn't straight, then the other one's not going to be straight as well. Like I said, mistakes were made. Learn from mine. Also, if you're going to buy clamps, don't go Harbor Freight. Just don't. They're bending, and they were clamping. Don't get me wrong, but clamping well, I don't think so. So here's me clamping, and you can see the clamps bending in the video. There was not a lot of pressure on them at all. That was me clamping them together, and just kind of, you could see how it was bending like a mattress when I was stepping on it, or like a box spring or something. Here I am marking the dowel joining spots where I'm planning on putting the dowels. If I was going to do this project again, I'd definitely just go buy a biscuit joiner for $100 and put some biscuits in between them rather than the dowels. So for the dowels to work, you have to be extraordinarily precise with them. Otherwise, it just doesn't line up properly. You can see the wiggle of these boards. It's comical at best. But like I said, so I'm marking these dowels out, and I'm trying to be as precise as possible. I'm really taking my time here. And I bought a dowel joining kit as well, which, not good. I mean, it's really just a guide you put on top that you clamp down to, and you put the drill in, and drill it out. Well, it was wiggling during the process, so even a fraction of a degree or whatever, is going to make these dowels not work right. In addition to the really dry cedar boards, if I was trying to ram them in there a little too hard, might crack the wood. And that's why in this part I was going very slow when I was ramming these dowels in here. And you can hear the melodic rubber malleting that's about to take place. There was almost a change in tone when I was hammering these in there. It was very clicky when it was sliding in, and then after I knew it was done, it was a very deep thud, as if the whole board was resonating. And first time I've ever done any dowel joining. I've done biscuit joining before, but I figured it's a good time to try it, right, with a project that I care deeply about. Let's experiment. So, yeah, that's what I'm doing here. So I believe the project in total had around 14 dowels in it, 7 for each connection. And this is what it looked like after it was all glued together. So now it's time to sand. And I did a lot of sanding. Sanding, and more sanding. After sanding for so many hours, I realized that maybe a hand plane was the best option to take off, good amount of meat from this board. Because it was very, it looked like a U almost when you were looking at it from the side. To give you a little perspective on that. So I did a lot of hand planing as well, which I don't believe I showed too much in the video. Now, the tabletop was essentially done after that, so I'm going on to the legs. Now the legs was just an even thicker piece of this Purple Heart cedar I found, so I cut it into, I believe it was maybe like 30, 35 inches, something like that for the desk, which was pretty low. You can see here I'm doing a test fit. Oh, working kind of good. After I cut these things up, I just cut them again with the saw. Way too close to the concrete. Not recommended, right? But I got it done. Did it relatively safely. Still got all 10 digits. And you've heard the outage. A sharp knife can be a lot more safe than a dull one. Having proper tools when you're doing a job could be the difference between being called Fred or four-finger Fred, right? Or something like that. So after I cut the legs of this and I had the tabletop, it was time to pocket hole jig these legs so they were able to be screwed into the tabletop. So that's what I did there with that pocket hole jig. Didn't fit properly the piece of wood I was putting in there, so I had to put a piece of paper towel between the clamp and the wood. All in all, the pocket hole jig worked really well. I was really happy with it. And I screwed the legs directly onto the table with them. Now I was going to do some siding, and that's what we are preparing here. Now these were cedar fence posts, I believe. I don't think it was like red western cedar or something. It was just some generic cedar board. I didn't have any more of the Purple Heart cedar that I was able to get into the thinness I wanted because I don't have a planer, limited tool selection here. So just got these cedar planks and I cut them into, I believe I got an 8-foot, I got two 8-foot cedar boards, cut them in half and then glued 2 and 2 together, which was making a siding that I thought adequate, right, in terms of thickness. So glued them together, and I used a whole lot of pressure on these. The clamps just weren't going to work for this, so what did I do? Let's just get some bricks and stack them all on these so they can glue nice and tight together. So here's the bricks. Madden had these laying around the house as well. It's amazing what you can do if you just become a pack rat. You never know when you're going to need 50 or so bricks, or however many I use, maybe 30. Walking on them as well, just giving it the good old shimmy. And after that, you guessed it, more sanding. I want them really smooth, I wasn't able to achieve the smoothness that I was wanting, but you know, I ended up getting pretty nice. And it looked really good, especially, you know, that stain you saw in the beginning of the video, and you'll see at the end as well. Actually, it was more of an oil. I believe it was linseed oil. It worked really well. So here I'm cutting these down to the thick, cutting these down to the width that I need them, and not too unsafe, but very rickety and not conducive for precision. That's why always good to have a nice workbench, right? Here's me with this cheap Buckbro hand plane. Wouldn't recommend. I tried to do my own little tweaks on it to make it somewhat better, but if you're going to go out and buy a hand plane and plan on doing things with hand tools, just buy nice hand tools. If you don't believe me, go spend $20, $30 on a Buckbro hand plane. Let me know how it works for you, especially on really soft, dry wood. But it sufficed for the project, I guess, so I can't complain, right? For $20. Here I am cutting these sides at 45-degree angles in an attempt to put two 45-degree angles together for the corners and make a 90-degree beautiful angle. And you can see that here where I have going on, covering up those pocket hole jigs with these boards, and I'm going to do more pocket hole jigs on the legs in order to keep these sidings onto the legs. So here I'm doing that here, just lifting up a little bit due to the close proximity to the tabletop. But hey, if we're in it for precision, we'd be we'd be in a different field, right? Different profession. So, kind of giving a layout here. I didn't put any siding on the back, being that it was going to be backed up to a wall. Now, I did put a hinge in order to put like a drawer pull-out for maybe a keyboard and a mouse, but I decided in the end that I didn't want to do that. I did still leave the hinge there, and it is available. And I'm going to kind of show you roughly how I did it in the video. Now, I might end up putting a keyboard in it later, you know, a little keyboard drawer or something, but I didn't really end up messing with it too much. So there's the siding right there that's popping out. It ends up folding down too, and I had some screws kind of, you know, just for a rough guide or estimate of how this is going to work to keep it from falling down and stuff. Because I didn't quite have like the cabinetry hardware for it, and just a little too much to think about, right? So, but yeah, that is still in there. I ended up using some 90-degree brackets to secure that fixture you just saw me making beforehand. I ended up, you know, initially I put it in with some screws real quick, just kind of zipped it in there. And that worked really well as well. I just had two for each side. I did end up using some linseed oil for the project, and I did only use one coat. I would recommend using maybe 2 or 3. It definitely dried out, you know, leveling or anything on the legs to make sure they were not rickety. It was all pretty level, pretty nice, but I did lose a lot of thickness on that tabletop from having boards that weren't right from the get-go. If you don't fix it in the beginning, you're going to have to fix it later. Wise words of wisdom here on DHamDIY. Thanks for watching. See you next time.